May 12, 1945, Oberpfaffenhofen Airfield, Bavaria. The war had been over for 4 days, but nobody told the machine in Hangar 7. Captain James Hartwell stood in the doorway, his boots grinding against concrete still dusted with ash from fires that had burned weeks earlier. The smell hit him first, aviation fuel mixed with something metallic, almost sweet, like blood and gasoline. Behind him, 3 British intelligence officers waited in the spring cold, their breath forming clouds that dissolved into the gray Bavarian morning. None of them moved. They just stared. The aircraft inside didn't look real. It looked like something pulled from a fever dream or a future that hadn't arrived yet. Long, impossibly long, a needle made of aluminum and menace stretched across the hangar floor like a sleeping predator. 2 propellers, one in front, one in back, still and silent, but somehow threatening even in stillness. Paint the color of storm clouds, no markings, no swastikas, just raw, unfinished speed frozen in metal. Hartwell had seen hundreds of German aircraft in the past 3 weeks. Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, Junkers bombers gutted and left to rot in fields. But this was different. This wasn't abandoned. This was waiting. "Dornier Do 335, whispered Lieutenant Shaw, the intelligence officer with the clipboard in the trembling hands. He had been reading captured Luftwaffe documents for 72 hours straight. His eyes were red, his voice was thin. They called it the Pfeil, the arrow. Hartwell stepped inside. His heartbeat felt too loud. The hangar was vast and empty, but it pressed in on him anyway, like the walls were watching. Sunlight slanted through broken skylights, cutting the gloom into slices. Dust floated in the beams, slow and deliberate, as if time had thickened here. The Do 335 sat in the center of it all, its twin engines dead but somehow still humming with potential energy, with violence not yet spent. Shaw's voice came again, quieter now, uncertain. "We found the logbook." He held it out, a black leather journal, corners bent, pages stained with oil and something darker. Hartwell took it, opened it. German script, tight and precise. Dates, flight times, engine temperatures. Normal. Then, on the last page, a single line written in English. "It wants to fly faster than God will let it." Hartwell's throat went dry. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The ink had bled where the pen had pressed too hard. He looked up at Shaw, then back at the aircraft. The cockpit canopy was still intact, scratched but clear. He moved toward it, slowly, like approaching a wild animal. Inside the cockpit, strapped to the control column with wire, was a photograph. A woman, young, smiling. Behind her, a farmhouse and a field of sunflowers. On the back, in the same shaky handwriting, "Greta, wenn ich nicht zurückkomme." If I don't come back. Hartwell felt something twist in his chest. He had stopped thinking of them as human months ago. Easier that way, easier to do the job. But standing here holding a dead man's last thoughts, he couldn't escape it. The pilot had loved someone, had been terrified, had climbed into this machine knowing it might kill him, knowing the war was already lost, and flown anyway. "We need to test it," Shaw said behind him. "Command wants it airborne within the week. Operation Lusty protocols. We're shipping it to Wright Field." Hartwell didn't answer. He was staring at the rear propeller now, the one mounted behind the cockpit, inches from where the pilot's head would have been. One misfunction, one moment of bad luck, and the pilot would have been shredded before he even knew what happened. The Germans had built a masterpiece, and they had built a death trap. Shaw checked his watch. "We have a crew coming at 0800 to prep it for transport. We'll need to—" He stopped. They both heard it at the same time. A low hum, mechanical, rhythmic. It was coming from the aircraft. Hartwell's blood went cold. The engines were off, the fuel lines were disconnected. There was no electrical power in the hangar, but the sound was there, undeniable, growing louder. A vibration in the metal, a pulse. Shaw's face had gone white. That's not possible. Hartwell's hand moved to his sidearm, instinct, stupid, but instinct. The hum grew deeper, resonating through the concrete floor, through his bones. He stepped back from the cockpit, eyes locked on the instrument panel inside. And then he saw it. The altimeter was moving. Slowly, steadily, climbing. 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet. The aircraft was on the ground, but according to its instruments, it was flying.
May 19th, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. The Do 335 arrived in pieces, but it arrived whole. That was the first impossibility. 7 days of transport. Disassembled, crated, shipped across a broken continent and an ocean, and when the engineers at Wright Field bolted it back together in Hangar 4, every component fit perfectly. No damaged seals, no cracked fuel lines, no missing rivets, as if the aircraft had protected itself during the journey, as if it wanted to fly again. Major Tom Ridley stood in the observation room, watching through reinforced glass as the ground crew swarmed over the machine like ants trying to understand a giant. He had supervised the technical evaluation of 37 captured German aircraft in the past month. He knew how this worked. You stripped them down, you measured everything. You found the flaws, the shortcuts, the engineering compromises that desperation had forced into the design. You proved that American ingenuity was superior. But the Do 335 wasn't cooperating. "Fuel system is cleaner than anything we've built," muttered Chief Engineer Kowalski, flipping through page after page of inspection reports. His hands were stained black with grease, and his eyes hadn't slept in 3 days. "Daimler-Benz DB603 engines, 12-cylinder inverted V, supercharged, fuel injection decades ahead of our carburetor systems. The push-pull configuration eliminates torque issues entirely. And the speed." He trailed off, shaking his head. "What about the speed?" Ridley asked. "We ran the numbers 4 times. If the German test data is accurate, and everything we've seen says it is, this thing could hit 475 miles per hour in level flight. Our best fighter, the P-51 Mustang, tops out at 440. In a dive, maybe they're equal, but straight and level, nothing we have touches it." Ridley felt something cold settle in his stomach. He thought about the air war over Germany, thought about the boys in their Mustangs and Thunderbolts diving into flak and fire, believing they had the best machines in the sky. And somewhere below them, in scattered airfields and hidden factories, the Germans had been building this. "How many did they get operational?" he asked. "Best estimate? Maybe 20? Most were still in testing when the war ended. If they'd had 6 more months—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ridley looked through the glass. The Do 335 sat under floodlights, every panel exposed, every system laid bare. But it didn't look vulnerable. It looked patient. The twin propellers, front and rear, caught the light like blades waiting to spin. The cockpit canopy reflected nothing. A black mirror that swallowed whatever looked into it. "We're going to fly it," Ridley said. Kowalski looked at him. "Sir, with respect, we don't know what we're dealing with. The ejection seat alone." "What about it?" "It's the first operational ejection seat ever installed in a fighter. The rear propeller would kill the pilot if he tried to bail out normally, so they designed an explosive charge to blow the entire tail section off first, then the canopy, then the seat fires. It's genius. It's also insane. If the sequence fails—" "Find me a pilot," Ridley interrupted. His voice was harder now. "Someone experienced, someone with jet time if possible." Kowalski stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. He left the observation room without another word. Ridley stayed at the glass, Alone now. The hangar was too quiet. The floodlights too bright. He thought about the logbook they'd found in Bavaria, the photograph of the woman, the last line written in English like a confession or a warning. It wants to fly faster than God will let it. He had laughed when Shaw showed him that line, melodramatic nonsense, the superstition of a terrified pilot facing death. But now standing here, watching the Do 335 under the lights, he wasn't sure. The aircraft had a presence, a weight that had nothing to do with its physical mass. Every engineer who worked on it had mentioned it, quietly, like admitting to seeing ghosts. The instruments in Bavaria, the altimeter climbing while the aircraft sat on the ground. Ridley had written it off as an electrical malfunction, a short circuit, but he had seen the wiring diagrams, he had read the inspection reports. There was no power source, no explanation, unless the aircraft had its own. The door opened behind him. He turned. A young man in a flight suit stood there, slim, dark-haired, eyes that had seen too much too fast. Captain Eric Brennan, 24 years old, 53 combat missions over Europe, transitioned to jet testing after the war, one of the best pilots Wright Field had. "Sir," Brennan said, "Chief Kowalski said you needed someone to fly the Arrow." Ridley studied him. Brennan's hands were steady, his posture was relaxed, but there was something in his eyes, a hunger maybe, or a need to prove something. The kind of look that made men do dangerous things. "You know what you're signing up for?" Ridley asked. "Yes, sir. Fastest prop fighter ever built. Experimental ejection system, engines that haven't been properly tested, and a reputation for killing its pilots." "We don't know that it—" Brennan interrupted, his voice flat and factual. 16 prototypes built before full production. 7 crashed during testing, 4 pilots dead. The Germans kept building it anyway. That tells me everything I need to know." Ridley nodded slowly. "First engine test is tomorrow at 600 hours. Full power ground run. If that goes well, taxi tests the day after. If those go well, we'll talk about getting you airborne." Brennan's jaw tightened. "And if I say no, then I find someone else." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Through the glass, the Do 335 waited, silent and still. Then Brennan smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be here at 600 hours, sir." He left. The door closed. Ridley was alone again. He looked back at the aircraft. The floodlights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Probably just a power fluctuation. Happened all the time in the hangar. Nothing to worry about. But deep in the fuselage, where the fuel tanks connected to the engines, something was warming up. Something that had been cold for 7 days. The metal was expanding, molecule by molecule, so slowly that no instrument could measure it. The fuel lines were pressurizing, not from any external pump, but from an internal heat source that didn't appear in any engineering diagram. And in the cockpit, behind a black mirror of the canopy, the altimeter began to move again, climbing.
May 22, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio, 05:47 hours. The engines screamed, and the world held its breath. Captain Eric Brennan sat in the cockpit of the Do 335, his hands on the controls, his heart slamming against his ribs like it wanted out. Through the canopy, the dawn was breaking over Wright Field, pale gold light spilling across the runway, turning the asphalt into a river of fire. Beautiful. Terrible. The last thing he might ever see. The Daimler-Benz DB603 engines had been running for 6 minutes. Front engine, smooth, powerful, a controlled roar that vibrated through every bone in his body. Rear engine, different, angrier. A deeper snarl like something hungry waking up after a long sleep. The sound pressed against his skull from behind, so close he could feel the propeller blade slicing air just inches from his head. One malfunction, one shattered blade, and he'd be dead before his brain could process it. Arrow 1, this is Tower. Engine temps are climbing. Rear engine spiking. Watch that, Brennan. Ridley's voice. Tight, controlled, barely hiding the fear underneath. Copy, Tower. I'm taking her up. A pause. Too long. Then, cleared for takeoff. God be with you. Brennan smiled. God had nothing to do with this. He released the brakes. The Do 335 lunged forward like a caged animal finally freed. The acceleration slammed him back into the seat, brutal and immediate. The runway blurred beneath him, white lines, black asphalt, patches of oil streaking past faster than thought. The nose lifted, the tail lifted, and then the wheels left the ground and the arrow was flying. For 3 seconds, it was perfect. Then, the rear engine screamed. Not a mechanical scream, something worse, a high-pitched shriek that cut through the roar of wind and props like a knife through flesh. Brennan's vision blurred, the instrument panel went dark, every gauge, every dial just dead. But the engines kept running, the aircraft kept climbing. Faster! Arrow 1, you are deviating from flight plan. Level off. Brennan, do you copy? He didn't copy. He couldn't. His hands were locked on the controls, but the Do 335 was flying itself, pulling up into a steep climb that should have stalled it, but it didn't stall. It accelerated. 6,000 feet, 8,000 feet, 10,000 feet. The altimeter, the only instrument still working, was spinning so fast the numbers were a blur. Brennan tried to pull back on the throttle. His hand wouldn't move. The cockpit was freezing now, so cold his breath came out in white clouds that crystallized on the canopy. But outside, the air was on fire. The Do 335 was glowing. A pale blue light bleeding through the seams of the fuselage, pulsing in time with the rhythm of the engines. He could see it reflecting in the canopy, could see his own face lit by that impossible light, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. And then he heard it. A voice, not from the radio, from the aircraft. Faster! We must go faster! The words weren't in English, weren't in German. They were older than that. A language made of mathematics and desperation, spoken directly into his mind. The Do 335 had been built to outrun death, but death had been designed into every rivet, every fuel line. The Germans had poured everything into this machine, their genius, their fear, their last desperate hope, and the aircraft had drunk it all in. 15,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 25,000 feet. Brennan's lungs were burning. The oxygen mask had stopped working. Below him, right field was a toy, Ohio was a map, the world was a curve. Above him, the sky was turning black, the edge of the atmosphere. His vision narrowed. He thought about his mother, thought about the photograph in Bavaria, Greta waiting for a man who would never return. Thought about all the pilots who had climbed into machines they didn't understand and flown them anyway because someone had to. And then, with the last fragment of will he had left, he whispered, "No." His hand moved, 1 inch, enough to grip the emergency lever, the red handle marked with a lightning bolt and a skull, the ejection system. He pulled. Nothing happened. The Do 335 laughed like a sound of tearing metal and kept climbing. 30,000 feet. Brennan's eyes closed. The cold had settled into his bones. The blue light was everywhere now, dissolving the boundary between flesh and machine. And then the engine stopped. The roar cut off like a guillotine blade, and the silence that followed was absolute. The Do 335 hung in the black sky for one impossible moment, suspended between earth and void. Then it fell. 30,000 feet, 20,000 feet, dropping like a stone, like a meteor shot from heaven straight down into Ohio. The air screamed past the fuselage. The altimeter spun backward. Brennan's eyes opened, and through the canopy he saw the ground rushing up. His hands moved. Reflex. Training. He pulled back on the stick. The control surfaces bit into the air. The Do 335 shuddered and began to level off. 5,000 feet. 3,000 feet. The engines coughed and roared back to life. Brennan leveled off, the aircraft trembling beneath him like an exhausted horse. His radio crackled. "Aero 1, this is Tower. Brennan, if you can hear me, waggle your wings." He waggled the wings. Barely. Jesus Christ, what happened up there? What could he say? That the aircraft had tried to leave the atmosphere? That it had spoken to him? "Engine malfunction. Requesting emergency landing." "Cleared to land, Aero 1. The landing was shaky, but when the wheels touched down and the Do 335 rolled to a stop, Brennan was alive. That was more than he had expected. He sat in the cockpit for a long time after the engines went silent. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft, but he didn't move. He was staring at the instrument panel, at the altimeter. It read exactly 3,000 feet, but in the condensation on the glass, in letters that hadn't been there before, were two words in German. Noch schneller. Even faster. Epilogue. Classified after-action report. The Dornier Do 335 was never flown again. Captain Eric Brennan was grounded permanently. The aircraft was disassembled and sent to storage at Freeman Field, Indiana, where it remained in a locked hangar for 30 years. In 1975, the Smithsonian requested the Do 335 for display. When engineers opened the crates, they found every component corroded beyond recognition, as if the aircraft had aged a century in 3 decades. Except for one thing. The altimeter was still working, and it was still climbing.